As the conflict between Iran, the United States and Israel escalate, the world is watching not just the fight, but the ripple effect on global markets and energy security. Iran's threats to close the Strait of Hormuz, a vital corridor for 1/5 of the world's oil, has sent oil prices soaring and put shipping routes at risk. In response, the United States has stepped in with a mix of financial and military measures, including federal support for tanker insurance and the possibility of Navy escort. These moves aim to stabilize trade in car markets. Can government backing offset the risks of war? And how long can oil shipments safely pass through one of the world's most dangerous waterways? I mean, this is happening right in the Middle East. This story looks at the military escalation, the killing of Iran's top leaders, and the global response, while considering how this event could reshape energy security and international diplomacy. Welcome to Flash News. I am Tabitha Akol. Let's begin. What is this thing looking like? Now we're heading right into the strikes in Iran. The strike has killed Iran's supreme leader, top officials, and Iran is saying no surrender as they also retaliate. And then the United Nations also condemns Russia as calling it an act of aggression. On February 28 this year, the United States and Israel carried out coordinated air and missile strikes against multiple locations in Iran, including military bases and government facilities. The strikes occurred while nuclear negotiations were ongoing, effectively halting negotiations that were on the ground in which the President and the United States were into. Now, this was towards diplomacy. Officials in Washington and Tel Aviv described the operation as a preemptive measure to neutralize Iran's perceived nuclear and military threat. The sudden military action caught much of the world off guard and raised affairs of a wider regional conflict. Now, looking at the situation, could these strikes have been avoided if diplomacy had continued? There was earlier negotiations, but then President Trump was the first to announce the strike and the death of the supreme leader. But then, let's watch.
Launched Operation Epic Fury, one of the largest, most complex, most overwhelming military offensives the world has ever seen. Nobody's seen anything like it. We have hit hundreds of targets in Iran, including Revolutionary Guard facilities, Iranian air defense systems. Just now it was announced that we knocked out 9 ships plus their naval building, all in a matter of literally minutes. Iran's formerly supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is dead. This wretched and vile man had the blood of hundreds and even thousands of Americans on his hands and was responsible for the slaughter of countless thousands of innocent people all across many countries.
The Iran state media also announced, in an emotional and heartbreaking scene, announced the death of the supreme leader. Let's watch.
بعد از عمری مجاهدت حسینی دائمی و خستگی ناپذیر روح بلند و ملکوتی کوه نستوه ولایت پدر مهربان امت رهبر و امام مسلمین حضرت آیت الله العظما سید علی حسینی خامنه‌ای در راه سربلندی حرم جمهوری اسلامی ایران شهد گوارای شهادت را نوشیدند و به ملکوت اعلی پیوستند.
Well, this is so heartbreaking. Now we see that Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has led the country since 1989, along with several top military commanders and political leaders who were killed in the strikes. This represents a major blow to Iran's leadership and has also created uncertainty about succession and the future direction of the government. The attacks also resulted in civilian casualties and damage to infrastructure. At this point, how will Iran's leadership changes affect the country's stability? Most of its leaders have been killed. Its supreme leader have been killed in the strike. But then let's take a look and let's watch this.
Greatly targeted the supreme leader of Islamic Republic of Iran and many high military officials. Targeting the highest official of a sovereign UN member state is an egregious breach of international law and a direct attack on sovereign equality. Such conduct endangers the entire international system. The United States and the Israeli regime are deliberately targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. The schools, hospitals, Red Crescent facilities, and residential buildings were attacked. On the first day of the aggression, the girls' school in Minab, a small town in Hormuz province in southern Iran, was deliberately destroyed.
In response, Iranian officials vowed not to surrender, declaring that the strikes amounted to a declaration of war. The government set up a temporary council to oversee state affairs until a new supreme leader is chosen. Leaders also promised retaliation, stating that Iran intends to resist foreign intervention and continue defending its sovereignty. The country's hardline stance has intensified fears of prolonged conflict in the Middle East, with Iran striking Gulf nations, including the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Beirut, in a bid for defense. Now, how might Iran's refusal to surrender influence the duration and intensity of the war? As we have just listened, that was Iran's representative speaking at the United Nations in total condemnation of the strike. But then this is a test one for the people of Iran, and the world is watching. The United Nations has come out to condemn the act of the strikes in Iran. The United Kingdom has come to condemn this act, and also Canada. But then now let's get into more of the details. You see that the Secretary General Antonio Guterres emphasized that diplomacy is not military action, is the way forward. United Kingdom officials expressed deep concern about the influence and the violence and its regional impact, saying that conflict cannot replace peaceful diplomatic efforts and urging all parties to show restraint. Also, we see that the United Kingdom Prime Minister Starmer denounced any participation in the war with Iran, calling it unconstitutional and undermines international law. Let's watch.
I want to be very clear.
Who is on?
We all remember the mistakes of Iraq, and we have learned those lessons. We were not involved in the initial strikes on Iran, and we will not join offensive action now. But Iran is pursuing a scorched earth strategy, so we are supporting the collective self-defense of our allies and our people in the region, because that is our duty to the British people. We are not joining these strikes, but we will continue with our defensive actions in the region.
Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney described the strikes as a failure of the international order and pressed for de-escalation, emphasizing the need for international law and negotiations to resolve the conflict. Also, we see that several nations in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East criticized the attacks as violation of international law and harmful to global stability, especially given that talks were still ongoing when the strikes occurred. Now, Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, in a statement has this to say. Let's watch.
What is happening in the Middle East is calamitous. It is the most dangerous development that could go way beyond the Middle East as well, because it now involves many more countries than just the 2 countries or 3 countries. So it's very concerning. And I had occasion to speak to some of the heads of state in that area and pass on our commiserations to them and hope that their own people will be safe, but also to ask them to safeguard the people from our own country.
Russia, Iran's ally, condemned the U.S. and Israeli strikes as an unprovoked act of armed aggression, accusing them of violating international law and risking a broader crisis in the region. Moscow also criticized efforts to encourage internal dissent in Iran, calling such rhetoric hypocritical while military operations continue. Russia's statement reflects growing tensions between Western powers and other global players over the conflict. Now, a Russia representative in the United Nations made a statement regarding this. Let's watch.
This sort of reaction is coming at a time when Iran has been subject to armed attack, to military attack at the peak of an active negotiating process. The hypocrisy of our European colleagues knows no borders. These aren't even double standards. It's a parallel reality. The other side of the looking glass. In the English language, there's an ideal term to describe this situation: victim blaming. One gets the impression that London, Paris and Berlin are living within illusions that they have created for themselves and are broadcasting to the world. However, attempts to mislead the international community are doomed to fail. Any common sense person will fully well understand who is responsible, who bears responsibility for this latest uncontrolled escalation.
The conflict has already caused civilian casualties and has disrupted global markets, particularly energy supplies. Analysts warn that killing a country's head of state and top officials could deepen the fighting and make it harder to find a peaceful solution. What leaders continue to call for an end to the violence and a renewed focus on negotiations. Now, away from that and bringing you over to the economic heat of the war in Iran. As the war escalates, global markets are disrupting. Right after Iran threatens to close up the Strait of Hormuz, in a rare show of defiance, the United States President Donald Trump has ordered federal support for oil tanker insurance and signaled that the U.S. Navy could begin escorting vessels through the Strait of Hormuz if conditions worsen. President Trump said the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation would provide political risk insurance and financial guarantees to sustain maritime trade in the Gulf, a move aimed at stabilizing oil markets rattled by escalating hostilities involving Iran.
Spain has been very, very uncooperative, and so has UK. Now, the second one is shocking, but this is not the age of Churchill. I will say the UK has been very, very uncooperative with that stupid island that they have, that they gave away and took a 100-year lease, having to do with perhaps indigenous people claiming the island, but never even saw the island before. What's that all about? And they ruin relationships. It's a shame.
The decision marks one of the administration's most assertive interventions yet to contain surging crude prices, as recent Israeli and U.S. strikes in Iran have disrupted tanker shipments across key waterways. Global oil prices have climbed sharply since the weekend attacks triggered fighting that has hindered shipping routes in the region. Industry analysts and ship owners cautioned that military escorts and DFC-backed insurance may not be sufficient to reverse rising costs. The DFC, established in 2019, partners with private investors to support development projects abroad. Its expanded role in underwriting maritime trade reflects the administration's readiness to deploy financial and military tools to safeguard global energy flows. President Trump reiterated that the U.S. commitment to maintaining open energy routes and indicated that further measures are under consideration. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Energy Secretary Chris Wright were scheduled to meet with the President to finalize additional proposals, according to sources familiar with the discussion. Now, earlier in the day, President Trump acknowledged that Americans may face temporary higher fuel prices, but expressed confidence that costs would fall once the conflict subsides. Prolonged increases, however, could complicate Republican efforts to retain control of Congress in the November midterm elections. Oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz, a critical passage between Iran and Oman that handles roughly 1/5 of global oil supply, have been severely disrupted. Several tankers have reported being damaged, while others remain stranded. Shipping firms and insurers are reassessing their exposure to the region. War risk premiums have jumped significantly, with some insurers scaling back or withdrawing coverage. Higher insurance costs have made voyages through the area more expensive, prompting delays and route adjustment. U.S. backing for tanker insurance has historically precedent. During the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, Washington reflagged Kuwaiti tankers and deployed naval escorts after private insurers pulled coverage. Following the September 11, 2001 attacks, the government also issued insurance policies to stabilize shipping markets amid elevated risk premiums. Now we are looking at this and thinking of the naval capacity and ongoing risks in the region. Shipping sources said the effectiveness of Trump's proposal may be limited if hostilities persist. As of Monday, the U.S. Navy had 12 warships in the Middle East, including an aircraft carrier, some of which are already engaged in strike operations and missile defense. Escorting commercial vessels could expose naval forces to additional risks, including missile fire and attacks by small armed boats. The Navy periodically conducts escort missions in high-risk waterways, and multinational naval task forces, including Combined Task Force 152 currently led by Qatar, could potentially assist. Analysts say insurance rates are likely to remain elevated even if some ships resume transit under naval protection. Some operators may seek direct arrangement to secure passage, while others could continue diverting route. The administration has so far been reluctant to tap the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, though officials may reconsider if oil prices continue to rise. Energy policy analysts warn that threats to production facilities, in addition to shipping disruptions, pose further upside risks to crude market. Now, not only that, we're looking at the tension and the rattling, we would say, of the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom in a dispute over Iran strike. The United States President Donald Trump said on Tuesday that British Prime Minister Keir Starmer was no Winston Churchill, escalating a public dispute over Britain's limited backing of U.S. airstrikes on Iran. Speaking at the White House, Trump criticized Starmer's stance after the UK declined to join the US-Israeli assault on Tehran. He contrasted the Labour leader with former wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who led Britain during World War II. Let's take a look.
Spain has been very, very uncooperative, and so has UK. Now the second one is shocking, but this is not the age of Churchill. I will say the UK has been very, very uncooperative with that stupid island that they have, that they gave away and took a 100-year lease, having to do with perhaps indigenous people claiming the island, but never even saw the island before. What's that all about? And they ruin relationships. It's a shame. It's the worst you go.
The remarks marked Trump's third public criticism of Starmer this week, as Washington's military campaign against Iran raises concern among some U.S. allies over the scope and legality of the strikes. Starmer has said Britain did not participate in the operation because any military action must be based on a clear legal framework and a viable plan. However, London has since allowed the United States to use British bases for what it described as limited defensive operations following Iranian drone and missile attacks on U.S. allies in the region. Let's watch.
Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom was not involved in the initial strikes on Iran by the US and Israel. That decision was deliberate. We believe that the best way forward for the region and for the world is a negotiated settlement. President Trump has expressed his disagreement with our decision not to get involved in the initial strikes. But it is my duty to judge what is in Britain's national interest. That is what I've done, and I stand by it. Mr. Speaker, it is important for me to say that our bases in Cyprus are not being used by US bombers. The security of our friends and partners in Cyprus is of critical importance. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear. The strike on RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus was not in response to any decision that we have taken.
A British base in Cyprus was struck by a drone on Monday. Cyprus officials said the device was likely launched by the Iran-backed Lebanese group Hezbollah. During a meeting with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Trump also voiced frustration over delays in securing landing access for U.S. aircraft at the Diego Garcia base in the Indian Ocean, calling the situation inconvenient for American operations. The disagreement has strained the so-called special relationship between the United States and Britain, a partnership rooted in defense cooperation and intelligence sharing. Britain, France and Germany issued a joint statement over the weekend confirming consultations with Washington and calling for renewed diplomatic engagement. At home, Starmer faces pressure from both sides of the political spectrum. Some opposition lawmakers have urged a stronger condemnation of U.S. actions, while others argue Britain should offer firmer support to its key security ally. Addressing Parliament, Starmer said his decisions were guided by Britain's national interests. A YouGov poll published Tuesday showed that 49% of Britons oppose the U.S. strikes in Iran, while 28% supports them. Now, this is the situation coming right here from the relationship of the United States and Britain, and now heading over to Africa. Here's a recent report. Military chiefs from member states of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, have agreed to establish a new regional force to counter jihadist violence and rising insecurity across West Africa. The decision was reportedly reached during a meeting of defense officials in Freetown over the weekend. Talks focused on the growing terrorist threat in the region, the spread of transnational organized crime, and persistent maritime security challenges along the West African coast. The proposed force is expected to comprise about 2,000 troops tasked with tackling terrorism and broader security threats. Rather than being permanently deployed abroad, the troops would remain based in their respective countries, while Sierra Leone would serve as a logistical hub. Key details including funding arrangements and operational structure are still under discussion. ECOWAS has yet to issue an official public statement confirming the plan. The Sahel region is a vast belt stretching between the Sahara Desert and Sub-Saharan Africa, has experienced years of insurgency driven by extremist groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. Violence has been particularly intense in Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, three former French colonies that recently withdrew from ECOWAS following military coups. The three countries have since formed their own security alliance. However, a senior West African military official indicated that efforts would be made to encourage cooperation with the proposed ECOWAS force, noting that the trio remains central to effort against jihadist groups operating in the Sahel. Further details on the force's mandate and timeline are expected once member state finalizes financing, and coordination mechanism. This is a report coming on from around the world and over in Africa. Until next time, this is where we'll be drawing the curtain on today's Flash News. Remember, I'll bring you Untold Stories and Undaunted at the top of the hour, 8 p.m. Until then, do have a pleasant day and stay safe.